The wind tasted like copper and dust. It always did in Red Hollow, especially in late autumn when the land turned brittle and the sky hung low like a threat. Mara Quinn stood at the edge of town, her single canvas bag slung over one shoulder, her boots caked in 3 days' worth of road grime. She'd walked most of the way. The stagecoach driver had refused to take her the last 10 miles once he'd learned where she was headed. "Iron Ridge," he'd said, spitting tobacco juice onto the wheel. "You got a death wish, lady?" She hadn't answered. There was no point. Death wishes required hope, and Mara had run out of that long ago. The town itself was small, sun-bleached, and suspicious. A dozen buildings lined a single street, a general store with peeling paint, a saloon that never seemed to close, a livery stable, a sheriff's office with bars on the windows, and a church with a crooked steeple. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, and strangers were studied like evidence at a crime scene. Mara walked down the center of the street, ignoring the stairs. A woman sweeping the porch of the boarding house paused mid-stroke. 2 men outside the saloon stopped talking. A child peeking through a shop window ducked out of sight when Mara glanced over. She knew what they saw. A woman alone, no wedding ring, no escort, no explanation. In a place like this, that was enough to convict her. The general store was dim and smelled of leather, lamp oil, and old wood. Behind the counter stood a man with silver hair and a face like carved stone. He didn't look up when she entered. "I'm here about the job," Mara said. The man's hands stilled on the ledger he'd been writing in. Slowly, he raised his eyes. They were pale, cold, and measuring. "The ranch job?" "Yes." He set down his pen with deliberate care. "You know what you're asking for? A position as housekeeper, room and board included. That's what the posting said." "The posting's been up for 4 months," the man said flatly. "No one's taken it." "I'm taking it." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her worn coat to the fading bruise on her cheekbone she hadn't quite managed to hide. "You running from something?" "Aren't we all?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. "Name's Garrett. I manage supplies for the ranch. If you're serious, you'll need to ride out there yourself. It's 8 miles northwest. Follow the ridgeline till you see the iron gates." Mara took the paper. It was a hand-drawn map, surprisingly detailed. "One more thing," Garrett said, his voice dropping. "Caleb Rourke isn't like other men. He doesn't talk much, doesn't smile, doesn't live, if you catch my meaning. His wife and daughter died 3 years back. Fever took them both in the same week. He's been a ghost ever since." "I'm not afraid of ghosts." "Maybe you should be." Mara folded the map and tucked it into her coat pocket. "I've met worse things than grief, Mr. Garrett. Trust me." She left before he could reply. The ride to Iron Ridge Ranch took 2 hours on a borrowed mule Garrett had grudgingly rented her. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, all sagebrush and red stone and sky so big it felt like drowning. The wind picked up as she climbed higher, carrying the scent of juniper and something else, something burnt, like old smoke that never quite left the air. The gates appeared suddenly, rising out of the dust like iron sentinels. They were tall, black, and ornate, clearly made by someone who'd once cared about beauty. Now they stood slightly crooked, one hinge rusted, the other sagging. Beyond them, a dirt road wound toward a sprawling house built from dark wood and stone. Mara dismounted and pushed the gates open. They shrieked in protest, the sound cutting through the silence like a scream. The house was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. The windows were shuttered. The front door was closed. Nothing moved. No smoke rose from the chimney. No horses stood in the nearby corral. It looked abandoned, but it wasn't. She could feel him watching. Mara tied the mule to the porch railing and climbed the steps. The wood creaked beneath her boots. She raised her hand to knock. The door opened. The man standing in the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, and still as stone. His hair was dark, streaked with early gray, and his face was hard-lined, weathered by sun and something deeper. His eyes were the color of winter rivers, gray, cold, and unreadable. He didn't speak. "I'm here about the housekeeper position," Mara said, keeping her voice steady. "My name is Mara Quinn." Caleb Rourke stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. His gaze moved over her face, her clothes, her hands. She had the strange sensation of being weighed and measured, though she couldn't tell if she'd passed or failed. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in." His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't used it in days. Mara stepped over the threshold and immediately understood why no one had stayed. The house was a tomb. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and disuse. Heavy curtains blocked out most of the light. Furniture sat draped in sheets like corpses. The floors were scuffed and unwept. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the ceiling, and everywhere, there was the oppressive weight of absence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that would never return. Caleb closed the door behind her, shutting out the wind. "Kitchen's through there," he said, nodding toward a doorway on the left. "Bedroom's upstairs. You'll take the one at the end of the hall. Meals are at dawn and dusk. I don't expect conversation. I don't expect company. I expect the work done. That's all." Mara turned to face him. "And if I have questions?" "You won't." "What if I do?" His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might throw her out, but instead he simply looked away, as if the effort of meeting her eyes was too much. "Then keep them to yourself." He walked past her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway beyond. Mara stood alone in the entryway, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere upstairs, a shutter rattled. The wind moaned through the eaves, the floor creaked beneath her weight. She set down her bag. And then, for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. She'd survived worse than silence. So, the first week was a battle. Not with Caleb, he barely acknowledged her existence, but with the house itself. Every room was a monument to neglect. Dust coated every surface. The kitchen was a disaster of unwashed dishes, rusted pans, and a stove so caked with grease it was a miracle it still worked. The floors were warped in places. The windows were so filthy she could barely see through them. And the smell, stale air, old smoke, and something faintly sour, clung to everything. Mara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing, scouring, hauling water from the well outside until her arms ached. She threw open the windows despite the cold, letting fresh air sweep through. She scoured the stove, boiled water for dishes, and swept the floors until the broom wore thin. Caleb watched from a distance, never speaking, never helping. He would appear in doorways like a shadow, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Then he'd vanish again, retreating to wherever he spent his days. She learned his patterns quickly. He rose before dawn and disappeared into the fields or the barn. He returned at dusk, silent and covered in dirt. He ate whatever she put in front of him without comment. He never said thank you. He never said anything. But he was always watching. On the third day, Mara found the locked room. It was upstairs, at the far end of the hall, past her own small bedroom, past 2 other empty rooms, tucked away like a secret. The door was closed, the handle tarnished. She'd walked past it twice before noticing the thin chain wrapped around the handle, securing it to a nail in the doorframe. She stopped, staring at it. A locked room in a house full of ghosts. "Don't." Mara spun around. Caleb stood at the top of the stairs, his face dark, his voice sharp as a blade. "Don't even think about it." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I need to clean, not that room. It's part of the house. Not that room." The air between them crackled with tension. Mara could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. This wasn't just a rule. It was a wound. She stepped back from the door. "All right." Caleb's jaw unclenched slightly. He turned and descended the stairs without another word. Mara stood alone in the hallway, staring at the locked door. Whatever was behind it, it mattered. And sooner or later, she'd find out why. The first real conversation happened on the 7th night. Mara had made stew, thick, hearty, with vegetables from the root cellar and dried beef she'd found hanging in the smokehouse. She set the bowls on the table and waited. Caleb entered at his usual time, sat down without a word, and began to eat. The silence stretched. "How long has it been since someone cooked for you?" Mara asked. Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "Why does it matter?" "It doesn't. I'm just curious." "Don't be." "Too late." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than ice in his eyes. Irritation, maybe. Or exhaustion. 3 years, he said finally. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Mara's throat tightened. The specificity of it, the exactness, told her everything. He was counting. Still counting. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I don't want your pity. Good. I don't have any to give. That caught him off guard. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know what it's like to lose everything, Mara said, meeting his gaze head on. I know what it's like to be the person everyone stares at, the one they whisper about, the one they think is already dead. So no, Mr. Rourke, I don't pity you. I understand you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb pushed back from the table and stood. Finish your dinner, Miss Quinn, and stay out of my business. He left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Mara sat alone at the table, the stew cooling in front of her. But she smiled again, because for the first time he'd called her by name. The town came to her on the 10th day. Mara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of hooves and wheels. She turned to see a wagon rolling up the road, driven by a woman in a faded blue dress and a wide-brimmed hat. The woman pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and climbed down with practiced ease. She was older, maybe 50, with sun-dark skin, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that said she didn't take nonsense from anyone. You must be the new girl, the woman said, looking Mara up and down. Mara Quinn. Esther Moss, I run the boarding house in town. She gestured to the back of the wagon, which was loaded with crates. Brought supplies. Garrett said you'd need them. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. The crates were filled with food, flour, sugar, coffee, dried fruit, cured meat. More than she could carry alone. I didn't order these, Mara said. Didn't have to. Garrett figured you'd need help keeping this place running. Esther's gaze drifted to the house, then back to Mara. How long you planning to stay? As long as I'm needed, Esther snorted. That's what the last 3 said. None of them made it past 2 weeks. I'm not them. No, Esther said slowly, her eyes sharp and assessing. I don't suppose you are. They unloaded the crates together, carrying them into the kitchen in silence. When they finished, Esther lingered in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You should know, she said quietly. Folks in town are talking. About you. About why you're here. Mara's stomach tightened. Let them talk. They're saying you ran from something, that you're hiding. And what do you think? Esther studied her for a long moment. I think a woman doesn't end up in a place like this unless she's got nowhere else to go. I also think that don't mean she's weak. She paused. But you should know there are people watching this ranch. People with money and plans. And they don't take kindly to obstacles. Who? Mara asked. Esther's mouth pressed into a thin line. Victor Hale. Owns half the county, wants the other half, and Caleb's land sits right in the middle of what he's after. What does he want with it? Water rights, rail access, power. Esther shook her head. Hale's been circling this place for 2 years, waiting for Caleb to break. So far he hasn't. But a man grieving is a man vulnerable, and Hale knows it. Mara's jaw tightened. Then he'll be disappointed. Esther smiled, just a little. Maybe. Or maybe you just walked into something bigger than you realize. She tipped her hat. Good luck, Miss Quinn. You're going to need it. She climbed back onto her wagon and rode away, leaving Mara standing in the doorway, staring after her. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and the house groan around her. Her mind wouldn't settle. Victor Hale, water rights, power. She'd come here looking for refuge, but refuge, it seemed, had its own battles. Around midnight, she heard it, a sound from somewhere below, low, deliberate. Footsteps. Mara slipped out of bed, pulled on her robe, and crept to the door. The hallway was dark, lit only by faint moonlight filtering through a crack in the curtains. She moved quietly, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The sound came from downstairs. She descended the staircase slowly, one hand on the banister. The house was still, but not empty. She could feel him. The kitchen door stood open. Inside, Caleb sat at the table, a bottle of whiskey in front of him, a glass in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" Mara asked softly. "Never do." She crossed the room and sat down across from him. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows across his face. He looked older in the dim light, worn down, hollowed out. "How long has it been since you slept through the night?" she asked. Caleb's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so bitter. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The same answer, the same count. Mara reached across the table and gently took the glass from his hand. He didn't resist. "You're going to kill yourself like this," she said. "Maybe. Is that what you want?" He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw past the ice, past the walls. Beneath it all was something raw and broken. A man who'd been drowning for so long he'd forgotten how to swim. "I don't know what I want anymore," he said quietly. Mara set the glass aside. "Then start small. Get some sleep. Eat a real meal. Fix the gate that's been hanging crooked for 3 years. Why do you care?" "Because someone has to." He stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "You don't even know me." "No," Mara agreed, "but I know what it's like to be lost, and I know that sitting alone in the dark doesn't fix it." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb stood, picked up the bottle, and walked to the sink. He poured the rest of the whiskey down the drain. "Go to bed, Miss Quinn." "Only if you do the same, Mr. Rourke." He glanced at her, and this time, just for a second, his expression softened. "Deal." The next morning, Caleb was up before dawn, just like always. But this time, when Mara came downstairs to start breakfast, she found him at the stove, awkwardly frying eggs. She stopped in the doorway, stunned. He glanced over his shoulder. "Don't get used to it." Mara smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." They ate together in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Not heavy, not suffocating, just quiet. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt a little less like a grave. The first threat came on the 14th day. Mara was in the yard, hanging freshly washed linens, when she heard the horses. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouettes against the afternoon sun. They rode slowly, deliberately, making their presence known. She straightened, shielding her eyes. Caleb emerged from the barn, a rifle cradled loosely in his arms. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. The message was clear. The rider stopped at the gate. The man in front was tall, dressed in expensive clothes, his hat perfectly angled. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and meant none of it. "Caleb Rourke," the man called out, his voice smooth and practiced. "It's been too long." Caleb said nothing. The man's smile widened. "Still the strong, silent type, I see. That's all right, I'll do the talking." He gestured to the land around them. "Beautiful place you've got here. Shame to see it fall apart." "It's not falling apart," Caleb said flatly. "Isn't it?" The man's gaze slid to Mara, lingering just a little too long. "Though I see you've found help. That's enterprising." Mara's skin crawled. "What do you want, Hale?" Caleb asked. Victor Hale's smile never wavered. "Just checking in, making sure you're all right out here. It's a dangerous world, after all. Accidents happen, fires, droughts, thieves in the night." He paused. "But you know that already, don't you?" Caleb's grip on the rifle tightened. Hale noticed. His smile sharpened. "I'm a patient man, Caleb. But patience has limits. Think about my offer. It's generous, more than generous, and it won't last forever." He tipped his hat to Mara. "Ma'am." Then he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. Mara watched them disappear over the ridge, her heart pounding. "What offer?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer. He just turned and walked back to the barn, the rifle still in his hands. But Mara had heard enough. The war had begun. And whether he wanted it or not, she was already in it. That night, Caleb didn't come to dinner. Mara waited at the table, the food growing cold between the 2 empty plates. The lamp flickered. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. She counted the minutes, 10, 20, 30, before finally standing and carrying both plates to the counter. She found him in the barn. He was standing in front of an old workbench, his hands braced against the worn wood, his head bowed. The rifle leaned against the wall behind him. In the lamplight, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the bench like he was trying to hold the world in place. "You need to eat," Mara said from the doorway. Caleb didn't turn around. "I'm not hungry." "That's not what I asked." He exhaled sharply, a sound caught between frustration and exhaustion. "What do you want from me, Miss Quinn?" The truth would be a start. About what? About Victor Hale, about whatever offer he's dangling, about why a man with money and power is so interested in a ranch that's barely standing. Caleb's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he straightened and turned to face her. "This land sits on the only reliable water source for 50 miles, he said, his voice flat and mechanical, like he was reciting facts he'd repeated too many times. "The creek that runs through the north pasture feeds into the valley, controls the water, you control the ranches below. Hale's been buying up land for 2 years, piece by piece. Mine's the last one standing between him and complete control. So he wants to buy you out." "He wants me gone," Caleb corrected. "One way or another." Mara crossed her arms. "And you've refused. Every time. Why?" His eyes flashed. "Because it's mine. Because I built this place with my own hands. Because my wife is buried on that hill." He pointed toward the window, toward the darkness beyond. "Because I'm not giving him the satisfaction of watching me break." Mara stepped closer. "But he's not going to stop, is he?" "No." "So what's your plan?" Caleb laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Plan? There is no plan. I keep the gates locked. I keep the rifle loaded, and I wait for him to make a mistake." "That's not a plan," Mara said sharply. "That's surrender in slow motion." His eyes narrowed. "What would you know about it?" "More than you think." She met his gaze without flinching. "I know what it's like to be backed into a corner. I know what it's like when the whole world wants you gone and you're too tired to fight back. But I also know that waiting for someone to make a mistake doesn't save you. It just drags out the inevitable." Caleb stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "Then what do you suggest?" "Fight back." "I am fighting." "No," Mara said. "You're surviving. There's a difference." The words hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Caleb turned away, his hands curling into fists. "You don't understand. I've already lost everything that mattered. This land? It's all I have left. And if I lose it fighting Hale, then I'll have nothing. At least this way I still have something to hold on to." Mara's chest tightened. She understood that logic, the desperate arithmetic of loss, the way you convinced yourself that holding still was safer than moving forward. "You're wrong," she said quietly. He looked back at her. "You haven't lost everything," Mara continued. "You're still breathing. You're still standing, and as long as that's true, you have a choice. You can keep hiding behind these walls, waiting for the world to take the last thing you love. Or you can stop waiting and start living again." Caleb's expression darkened. "Living," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to talk to me about living? You, who showed up here with nothing but a bag and a past you won't talk about? You think I don't see it? The way you flinch when someone gets too close? The way you check the road every morning like you're expecting someone to come for you?" Mara's breath caught. "Don't lecture me about living, Miss Quinn," Caleb said, his voice cold. "Not when you're just as much a ghost as I am." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mara felt the words land like blows, each one precise and cutting. He was right. She knew he was right, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing her own fear reflected back at her, was something else entirely. She turned and walked out of the barn without another word. Behind her, Caleb stood alone in the lamplight, his hands still clenched, his chest heaving. Neither of them slept that night. The next morning, Mara attacked the house with a fury she hadn't known she still possessed. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She hauled water until her arms burned. She threw open every window, every door, letting the cold air sweep through the rooms like a cleansing wind. She pulled down the heavy curtains, shook out the dust, and hung them outside to air. She scoured the kitchen until the counters gleamed. She swept the porch, fixed a broken shutter, and patched a hole in the roof where rain had been leaking through. Caleb watched from a distance, silent and wary, like he wasn't sure whether she was angry or just relentless. Maybe both. By midday, Mara had worked her way upstairs. She cleaned the empty bedrooms one by one, stripping away the sheets that had covered the furniture for years. Each room told a story: a child's bed with carved wooden posts, a rocking chair by the window, a dresser with faded paint. And then there was the locked room. She stood in front of it again, staring at the chain wrapped around the handle. The metal gleamed dully in the light. She could hear Caleb's voice in her head, sharp, final. Not that room, but Mara had never been good at following rules. She reached out and touched the chain. It was cold beneath her fingers, heavy and deliberate. Whoever had locked this door hadn't done it lightly. "I told you no!" Mara spun around. Caleb stood at the top of the stairs, his face hard, his eyes burning. "I wasn't—" "Don't lie to me." He crossed the hallway in 3 strides, stopping just short of her. "I told you to stay away from this room. That was the one rule. The only rule." "Why?" Mara demanded, her own anger flaring. "What's in there that's so important you'd rather let the rest of this house fall apart than deal with it? That's none of your business. It is if I'm living here. Then maybe you shouldn't be." The words hit like a slap. Mara stepped back, her hands trembling. "Fine. You want me gone? Say it. Tell me to leave, and I will." Caleb opened his mouth, then stopped. His jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to push her away, fighting against something else, something deeper. Finally, he looked away. "Just stay out of that room." His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. Mara nodded slowly. "All right." Caleb turned and walked back down the stairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Mara stood alone in the hallway, her heart pounding, her hands still shaking. She looked at the locked door one more time. Then she turned and went back to work. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. Caleb spent his time in the fields, mending fences and tending to the livestock. Mara kept the house running, cooking meals he barely touched and cleaning rooms he never entered. They moved around each other like strangers, careful not to collide. But the tension between them didn't ease. If anything, it grew. On the 4th day, Esther returned. She arrived in the late afternoon, her wagon loaded with more supplies and a basket of fresh bread. Mara met her at the gate, grateful for the distraction. "You're still here," Esther said, climbing down from the wagon. "I'm impressed." "So am I," Mara admitted. Esther laughed, a low, knowing sound. She handed Mara the basket. "Brought you something. Figured you could use it." They unloaded the wagon together, carrying the crates into the kitchen. When they finished, Esther lingered, her sharp eyes scanning the house. "You've been busy," she observed, "trying to be." "And how's our resident ghost?" Mara sighed. "Still haunted." Esther nodded, unsurprised. "That man's been carrying the weight of the world for too long. Someone needs to make him put it down." "I tried," Mara said quietly. "He's not interested." "Doesn't mean you should stop trying." Esther leaned against the counter, her expression serious. "Listen, I didn't just come out here to deliver bread. There's talk in town. Hale's men have been asking questions about you." Mara's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from. Why you're here, if you're running from something." Esther paused. "They're digging, Mara, and sooner or later, they're going to find whatever it is you're hiding." Mara's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "I'm not hiding anything." Esther raised an eyebrow. "We both know that's not true." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mara exhaled slowly. "I had a husband once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a good man. Or I thought he was. Turned out he had debts, bad ones. The kind that follow you. When he couldn't pay, they came for him. And when they couldn't find him," she looked away. "They came for me instead." Esther's expression softened. "What happened?" "I ran, left everything behind, changed my name, kept moving until I found a place no one would think to look." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out the middle of nowhere isn't far enough. Does Caleb know?" "No, and I'd like to keep it that way." Esther studied her for a long moment. "You can't run forever, Mara. Sooner or later, the past catches up, and when it does, you need people who'll stand with you." "I don't have people." "Maybe you do," Esther said quietly. You just haven't let them in yet." She left before Mara could respond, climbing back onto her wagon and disappearing down the road. Mara stood in the doorway, watching her go, the weight of her words settling heavy in her chest. That evening, Caleb came to dinner. Mara had made stew again, thick and hearty, the way she'd learned he preferred. She set the bowls on the table and waited. He entered at his usual time, paused when he saw the food, then sat down without a word. They ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, Caleb set down his spoon. "I owe you an apology." Mara looked up, surprised. "What I said the other night," he continued, his voice rough. "About you being a ghost. That was out of line." "It was also true," Mara said quietly. Caleb's eyes met hers, and maybe, but I had no right to say it. She nodded slowly. "And I had no right to tell you how to live your life." "You were right, though." He leaned back in his chair, his expression weary. "I have been surviving, not living, just existing, going through the motions because I don't know what else to do." Mara's throat tightened. "I understand that. I know you do." He paused. "That's why you're still here, isn't it? Because you're doing the same thing." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Caleb exhaled slowly. "The locked room upstairs. It was my daughter's." Mara's breath caught. "Her name was Lily," he continued, his voice soft and distant. "She was 5 when she died. Fever took her first. Then my wife, Anna, 3 days later. I buried them both on the hill behind the house. And I locked that door because I couldn't—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I couldn't bear to see it, to remember." Mara's eyes burned. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's not your burden to carry." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "But thank you for trying." They sat in silence for a long time, the lamplight flickering between them. Finally, Caleb stood. "Get some rest, Miss Quinn. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Why?" "Because I'm going to start fixing that gate, and I'm going to need help." Mara smiled, just a little. "I'll be ready." He nodded and left the room. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt a little less like a grave and a little more like a home. The next morning, they worked together. Caleb showed her how to hold the gate steady while he hammered the new hinge into place. They didn't talk much, just the occasional instruction, the quiet rhythm of work. But there was something different now, something lighter. By midday, the gate stood straight and true, no longer sagging. Caleb stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "That'll hold," Mara smiled. "Told you it was worth fixing?" He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw the ghost of a smile on his face. "Don't get cocky, Miss Quinn." "Wouldn't dream of it, Mr. Rourke." They walked back to the house together, the sun warm on their shoulders. Neither of them noticed the rider on the ridge, watching. That night, the first fire started. Mara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and ran to the window. In the distance, orange flames licked at the edge of the north pasture, climbing higher with every passing second. She grabbed her coat and ran downstairs. Caleb was already outside, shouting orders to himself, hauling buckets of water from the well. Mara joined him without a word, filling buckets, running toward the flames, throwing water onto the burning grass. They worked for hours, desperate and exhausted, until finally the fire died. Caleb stood in the smoking field, his face streaked with ash, his hands blistered and raw. Mara collapsed beside him, gasping for breath. "It was deliberate," Caleb said, his voice flat. Mara looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because the wind was blowing east. A natural fire would have spread toward the creek. This one started near the fence line and moved inward." He clenched his fists. "Someone set it." Mara's stomach churned. "Hail. Has to be. What are we going to do?" Caleb stared at the charred ground, his jaw tight. "I don't know, but this is just the beginning." He was right. The war had begun, and neither of them was ready for what came next. The days that followed were a blur of tension and vigilance. Caleb rode the property line every morning, checking fences, looking for signs of tampering. Mara kept watch from the house, scanning the horizon for riders. They barely slept. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. On the 5th night after the fire, Esther came again, but this time she wasn't alone. Garrett, the man from the general store, rode beside her. His face was grim. "We need to talk," Esther said. They gathered in the kitchen. Garrett set a leather satchel on the table and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are land deeds," he said. "Every property Hale's bought in the last 2 years. I've been tracking them." Caleb leaned forward. "Why?" "Because something doesn't add up." Garrett spread the papers across the table. "Look at this. Hale's been buying land, yes, but he's also been filing claims with the territorial office, claiming water rights, mineral rights, easements. Some of them are legitimate. Some," he tapped one of the documents, "some are forgeries." Mara's eyes widened. "He's been stealing land?" "Not stealing, manipulating. He finds legal loopholes, exploits them, and by the time anyone realizes what's happened, it's too late." Garrett looked at Caleb. "Your land is different. You have a clean title. No debts, no liens. He can't take it legally, so he's going to take it another way." "By force," Caleb said, "or by making you give up." Esther's voice was hard. "That fire was a warning. Next time it'll be worse." Caleb stood, pacing the room. "So what do I do? Fight a man who owns half the county? A man with money, lawyers, and armed men?" "You expose him," Garrett said. "You take these documents to the territorial judge. You prove he's been committing fraud." "And you think that'll stop him?" "No," Garrett admitted, "but it'll slow him down, and it'll give you leverage." Caleb stopped pacing. He looked at Mara, then at Esther, then at Garrett. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." Garrett nodded. "I'll arrange a meeting with the judge. But you need to be careful. Hale has eyes everywhere. If he finds out what we're planning—" "He won't," Caleb said. But even as he spoke the words, Mara could see the doubt in his eyes. The next morning, Caleb left for town. Mara stayed behind, keeping watch over the ranch. The hours dragged. She cleaned the kitchen 3 times. She checked the windows. She paced the porch. And then she saw them. 3 riders moving slowly up the road. Her heart stopped. She grabbed the rifle Caleb had left behind and stepped onto the porch. The riders stopped at the gate. The man in front was tall, dressed in black, his face shadowed by his hat. He smiled when he saw her. "Miss Quinn," he called out. "We meet at last." Mara raised the rifle. "You're not welcome here," the man laughed. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just came to deliver a message." "I'm not interested." "You should be." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You're a long way from home, aren't you? A long way from the people looking for you." Mara's blood turned to ice. "That's right," the man continued, his smile widening. "We know all about you, Mara. Or should I say Elizabeth Carson? Funny how names change when you're running from debts you can't pay." Her grip on the rifle tightened. "Here's the deal," the man said. "You leave. Tonight. And we forget we ever saw you. Stay, and we make sure everyone in this county knows exactly who you are and what you're running from." Mara's hands shook. "Get off this land." "Think about it," the man said. "You've got until sundown." He tipped his hat and rode away, his men following. Mara stood on the porch, the rifle still in her hands, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. They knew. And now? Everything was about to fall apart. Mara stood frozen on the porch long after the riders disappeared over the ridge. The rifle hung heavy in her hands, her knuckles white around the stock. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but she felt cold straight through to her bones. Elizabeth Carson. That name was supposed to be dead. Buried. Gone. She'd spent 2 years building distance between who she'd been and who she was now. 2 years of looking over her shoulder, of sleeping light, of never staying anywhere long enough to be remembered. And in one conversation, a stranger had ripped all of that away. The sound of hooves jolted her back to the present. She spun around, raising the rifle, her heart hammering against her ribs. But it was Caleb. He pulled his horse to a stop near the porch, taking in her rigid posture, the rifle, the fear she couldn't quite hide from her face. "What happened?" he demanded, swinging down from the saddle. Mara lowered the rifle slowly. "They came. 3 of them. Hale's men." Caleb's expression went hard as stone. Did they touch you? No, they just talked. About what? Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to lie, wanted to deflect, but the words Esther had spoken days ago echoed in her mind. You can't run forever. Sooner or later, you need people who'll stand with you. About me, she said quietly. About who I was before I came here. Caleb waited, his eyes never leaving her face. Mara set the rifle against the porch railing and sat down on the steps, suddenly exhausted. My real name is Elizabeth Carson. I was married to a man named Thomas. He was a gambler, though I didn't know it at first. By the time I figured it out, he'd already borrowed money from people you don't borrow from. When he couldn't pay, he ran, just disappeared one night and left me to deal with the consequences. What kind of consequences? Caleb asked, his voice carefully controlled. The kind that involve broken ribs and threats that don't stop. Mara stared at her hands. They wanted their money. I didn't have it. So they made it clear that if I couldn't pay in cash, I'd pay another way. That's when I left, changed my name, kept moving. I thought I'd gone far enough, but apparently I was wrong. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he climbed the steps and sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. How much do you owe? He asked. $3,000. Might as well be $3 million. And Hale's men know this. They know everything, Mara laughed bitterly. They gave me until sundown to leave. If I don't, they'll tell everyone in Red Hollow who I really am and what I'm running from. They'll make sure I'm run out of town, or worse. Caleb's jaw tightened. So Hale's plan is to isolate me. Take away the one person who's been helping keep this place running, make sure I'm alone again. Then he can squeeze harder. It's a good plan, Mara admitted, and it's going to work. Like hell it is. She looked at him sharply. Caleb, you're not leaving, he said, his voice flat and final. Not because Hale threatened you. Not because some men from your past tracked you down. You're staying right here. You don't understand what you're saying. If I stay, they'll destroy my reputation. They'll make it impossible for you to keep me here. The town will turn against both of us. Let them. Mara stared at him. Why? Why would you risk that? Caleb met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something other than grief or anger. She saw determination, certainty. Because you stayed when no one else would, he said quietly. Because you fought for this place like it was yours. Because you made me remember what it feels like to give a damn about something. He paused. And because I'm not letting Victor Hale win. Not this time. Mara's chest tightened. If I stay, it's going to get ugly. It's already ugly. Caleb stood, offering her his hand. Come on, we've got work to do. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. For the first time in 2 years, Mara Quinn stopped running. Mamnant. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Caleb rode back to town and returned with Garrett and Esther, both of them grim-faced and ready. They gathered in the kitchen as the sun began to set, spreading maps and documents across the table. If Hale's planning to expose you, Garrett said to Mara, then we need to get ahead of it. Control the narrative before he does. How? Mara asked. We tell the truth first, Esther said. On your terms. Before Hale can twist it into something worse. Mara's stomach churned. You want me to stand in front of the whole town and admit I'm running from debt collectors? I want you to stand in front of the town and tell them you're a woman who survived something terrible and came here looking for a second chance, Esther corrected. There's a difference. Will they care about the difference? Some will, some won't. Garrett leaned back in his chair. But it takes away Hale's weapon. If everyone already knows your story, he can't use it against you. Caleb stood near the window, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. And what about the legal angle, the forged documents? I met with Judge Holloway this afternoon, Garrett said. He's willing to review the evidence, but he's cautious. Hale has influence, and Holloway won't move unless he's certain the case will hold. How long will that take? Caleb asked. A week, maybe 2. We don't have 2 weeks. Caleb's voice was tight. Hale's already escalating. The fire, the threats. He's not going to sit back and wait for us to build a legal case against him. Then we don't wait, Mara said. Everyone turned to look at her. We force his hand, she continued, her mind racing. Hale's power comes from fear and secrecy. He operates in the shadows, using threats and intimidation because most people are too scared to fight back. But what if we shine a light on him? What if we make everything public? Esther's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. What are you suggesting? A town meeting, Mara said. We call everyone together. We present the evidence Garrett's collected. We show them exactly what Hale's been doing, the fraud, the manipulation, the violence. We make it impossible for him to hide. That's dangerous, Garrett said slowly. Hale won't take that kind of exposure lightly. No, Caleb agreed. He'll come after us with everything he has. Mara met his gaze. Then we'd better be ready. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Caleb nodded. All right, we do it, but we do it smart. Garrett, you handle the legal documents. Esther, spread the word in town. Make sure people show up. Mara and I will fortify the ranch. If Hale decides to hit us before the meeting, we need to be able to hold him off. Esther stood, her expression fierce. You're poking a hornet's nest, Caleb. Good, Caleb said. It's about time someone did. They finalized the plan quickly. The town meeting would be held in 3 days at the community hall. Garrett would present the evidence. Mara would tell her story, and Caleb would make it clear that he wasn't backing down. As Garrett and Esther prepared to leave, Esther pulled Mara aside. You sure about this? She asked quietly. Once you tell that story, there's no taking it back. I'm sure, Mara said. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. If this is going to end, it needs to end on my terms. Esther studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're braver than you think, girl. Don't forget that. She climbed onto her wagon and rode off into the gathering darkness, Garrett following close behind. Mara and Caleb stood together on the porch, watching them go. You don't have to do this, Caleb said quietly. The town meeting. Telling your story. I can handle Hale without putting you through that. No, you can't, Mara said. He's already made it personal. The only way we win is if we face him together. Caleb looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. Together, he repeated. Mara nodded. Together. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Caleb reinforced the fences, checked every lock, and cleaned every rifle on the property. Mara stocked the cellar with supplies and made sure they had enough water stored in case the well was sabotaged. They worked side by side, speaking little but understanding everything. On the second night, Mara found Caleb standing in the hallway upstairs, staring at the locked door. She stopped a few feet away, waiting. I haven't opened it since the day I locked it, Caleb said, his voice rough. 3 years, 2 months, and 28 days. Mara's chest ached. You don't have to open it now. Yes, I do. He reached up and unwound the chain slowly, deliberately. The metal rattled softly as it fell away. He wrapped his hand around the handle and paused. I need to stop hiding from the past. If I'm asking you to face yours, I need to face mine. He opened the door. The room beyond was small, painted pale yellow, filled with late evening light from a single window. A child's bed stood against one wall, the quilt still neatly made. Toys sat on a shelf, a wooden horse, a rag doll, a set of painted blocks. A rocking chair occupied the corner by the window. It was frozen in time, waiting for a little girl who would never come home. Caleb stepped inside slowly, like he was walking through water. He ran his hand along the edge of the bed, his fingers trembling. Anna used to sit in that chair and read to her every night, he said quietly. Lily loved stories. Couldn't get enough of them. She'd make us read the same ones over and over until we had them memorized. He smiled, a sad, broken thing. I can still hear her voice, still hear her laugh. Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate. Caleb turned to face her, his eyes red-rimmed. I thought if I locked this room, I could lock away the pain. But it doesn't work that way, does it? No, Mara said softly. It doesn't. He nodded slowly. Then he walked to the rocking chair, picked up the doll that sat in it, and held it carefully, like it was made of glass. I'm not ready to let go, he said. I don't know if I ever will be. But maybe I can stop running from it. That's enough, Mara said. That's more than enough. They stood together in the small yellow room, surrounded by ghosts and memories, and for the first time the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a place where healing might be possible. The night before the town meeting, Victor Hale made his move. Mara woke to the sound of shattering glass. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and ran to the window. Below in the yard, flames were spreading fast, too fast. Someone had thrown torches through the windows of the barn. "Caleb!" she screamed. He was already moving, grabbing his rifle, rushing down the stairs. Mara followed, pulling on her boots as she ran. They burst out onto the porch just as a line of riders appeared at the gate. 10 men, maybe more, all armed, all moving toward the house. "Get inside!" Caleb shouted, raising his rifle. "Like hell," Mara shot back. She grabbed the second rifle from the rack by the door and took up position beside him. The riders stopped 50 yards out. Victor Hale sat at the center of the line, his face illuminated by the firelight. He looked calm, almost bored. "Caleb Rourke," he called out, "I'm giving you one last chance. Sign over the land and this ends tonight. Refuse, and I'll burn everything you have to the ground." "Go to hell, Hale," Caleb shouted back. Hale shook his head slowly. "Wrong answer." He raised his hand. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Caleb?" "Wait," Caleb said quietly. "Not yet." Hale's hand dropped. The riders spurred their horses forward. "Now!" Caleb fired, the shot ringing out across the night. It struck the ground in front of the lead rider, sending up a spray of dirt. The horse reared, and the rider fought to control it. Mara fired next, aiming high, the bullet whizzing past another rider's head. The message was clear: come closer, and the next shots won't miss. The riders pulled up short, their horses stamping and snorting. Hale's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake, Rourke. The only mistake I made was not standing up to you 3 years ago," Caleb said, his voice steady and cold. "I'm done being afraid of you. You want this land? You're going to have to kill me for it." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, from the darkness beyond the firelight, came the sound of more hooves. Lots of them. Mara's heart leaped. A dozen riders emerged from the shadows. Garrett at the front, Esther beside him, and behind them, men and women from town. Ranchers, shopkeepers, families who'd had enough of Hale's intimidation. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop between Hale's men and the house. "That's far enough, Hale." Hale's face twisted with fury. "This doesn't concern you, Garrett." "It concerns all of us," Garrett said. "You've been squeezing this county for years, buying land with forged documents, threatening anyone who stands in your way. Well, we're done being silent." "You have no proof," Hale snarled. "Actually, we do." Garrett held up a leather satchel. "Every fraudulent deed, every forged signature, every bribe. Judge Holloway has copies, and tomorrow the whole town will see them." Hale's men shifted uneasily. A few of them exchanged glances. "You're bluffing," Hale said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Try me," Garrett replied. The standoff stretched, the only sound the crackling of the flames still consuming the barn. Finally, Hale yanked his reins hard, turning his horse. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes," Caleb said quietly. "It is." Hale rode off, his men following, their retreat swallowed by the darkness. The townspeople stayed behind, helping Caleb and Mara extinguish the fire. They worked through the night, hauling water, beating down flames, salvaging what they could. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin, but the house still stood. Esther found Mara sitting on the porch steps, covered in soot and ash, too exhausted to move. "You all right?" Esther asked. Mara nodded slowly. "I think so." "That was brave what you did, standing with him." "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did," Esther said. "You could have run, but you stayed. That says something." Mara looked at the people still working in the yard, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers becoming allies. "I'm tired of running," she said quietly. Esther smiled. "Good, because tomorrow you're going to stand in front of that whole town and tell them who you are, and we're going to stand with you." The town meeting was held at noon in the community hall, a large wooden building at the center of Red Hollow. By the time Mara and Caleb arrived, the place was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, crowded into doorways, spilled out onto the street. Mara's stomach churned. She'd never seen so many people in one place, all of them staring, whispering, waiting. Caleb took her hand. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Mara said. They walked to the front of the room together. Garrett was already there, standing beside a table piled with documents. Judge Holloway sat at the head table, his expression stern and impartial. Garrett began by presenting the evidence, reading from deeds showing signatures that didn't match, outlining the pattern of fraud Hale had been perpetrating for years. The crowd murmured, some in shock, others in anger. Then it was Mara's turn. She stepped forward, her hand shaking, her voice barely steady. "My name is Mara Quinn," she began, "but that's not the name I was born with. My real name is Elizabeth Carson. 2 years ago, I was married to a man who gambled away everything we had and left me to pay his debts. When I couldn't, the people he owed money to came after me. They hurt me, threatened me. So I ran. I changed my name and kept moving until I found Red Hollow, until I found Iron Ridge Ranch, until I found a place where I thought I could start over." The room was silent. "I'm not proud of running," Mara continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I'm not ashamed of surviving, and I'm not going to let Victor Hale use my past to destroy my future. I came here looking for a second chance, and I found people willing to give me one. That's all any of us are asking for. A chance to live without fear. A chance to fight back." She stepped back, her heart pounding. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, someone in the back began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire hall was applauding. Mara's eyes burned. She looked at Caleb, who stood beside her, his expression fierce and proud. Judge Holloway rose, holding up a hand for silence. "Based on the evidence presented today," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I am issuing a formal investigation into Victor Hale's land acquisitions. Any deeds found to be fraudulent will be voided. Furthermore, I am granting a restraining order preventing Mr. Hale from approaching Iron Ridge Ranch or its occupants." The crowd erupted in cheers. Mara felt Caleb's hand tighten around hers. They'd won. Not completely, not forever. But for today, they'd won. As they left the hall, the townspeople surrounded them, shaking hands, offering support. Esther hugged Mara tightly. "Told you," she whispered. "You're braver than you think." Caleb led Mara through the crowd, back toward the wagon they'd ridden in on. But before they could leave, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Victor Hale. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the defeat in his eyes. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But this isn't over. I'll be back." "No," Caleb said. "You won't. Because the next time you set foot on my land, I'll put a bullet in you." Hale's face twisted. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Hale turned and walked away. Mara watched him go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The ride back to Iron Ridge was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had defined the ranch for so long. This wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of grief and isolation. This was the calm after a storm, the exhale after holding your breath too long. Mara sat beside Caleb on the wagon bench, watching the landscape roll past. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Her hand still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of the meeting, from standing in front of all those people and laying herself bare. "You all right?" Caleb asked, not taking his eyes off the road. "I don't know yet," Mara admitted. "Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." They lapsed back into silence. As they approached the ranch, Mara could see the blackened skeleton of the barn against the sky, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But the house still stood. The land was still theirs, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was alone. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch and helped Mara down. They stood together for a moment, surveying the damage. "We'll rebuild," Caleb said quietly, "stronger than before." "How long will it take?" "Couple of months if we can get the lumber. Maybe sooner if folks are willing to help." Mara nodded. "They will be. You saw how they showed up tonight." "Because of you," Caleb said, turning to face her. "They came because you had the courage to stand up and tell the truth. Don't think I don't know that." Mara's throat tightened. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Caleb agreed. "But you started it. You made me believe we could fight back." Before Mara could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the air. They both tensed, Caleb's hand moving instinctively toward the rifle still strapped to the wagon. But it was Garrett and Esther riding up the path with two other men Mara recognized from town. "Easy," Garrett called out. "Just us." Caleb relaxed slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you two got home safe," Esther said, dismounting with practiced ease. "And bringing news." "What kind of news?" Mara asked. Garrett swung down from his horse, his expression grim. "After you left, Judge Holloway received word that Hale's already making moves. He's filed appeals, hired lawyers from the territorial capital. He's not going down without a fight." Caleb's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. The restraining order will hold for now, but Hale's got resources. He'll find ways around it." Garrett pulled out a folded document from his coat. "But there's something else. I did some more digging into the land records. Turns out your property has a provision in the original deed, something called a homestead protection clause." "What does that mean?" Mara asked. "It means the land can't be seized or sold against your will as long as you're actively working it and living on it. It was written into the deed by the original settler back in 1867. Most people don't even know these clauses exist anymore, but they're still legally binding." Caleb took the document, scanning it quickly. "So even if Hale finds a legal loophole to claim the land, this overrides it?" "Exactly. As long as you maintain the property and prove continuous residence, he can't touch you." Garrett's expression hardened. "But that's also why he's been trying to drive you off. If you abandon the land or it falls into disrepair, the clause becomes void." "Which is why he burned the barn," Mara said, understanding dawning. "He's trying to make it impossible to maintain the property." "Smart girl," Esther said. "That's exactly what he's doing, and he'll keep trying. Different tactics, different angles, but the goal's the same. Make it so you can't keep up with the work. Force you to give up." Caleb handed the document back to Garrett. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We rebuild. We prove we're not going anywhere." One of the other men who'd ridden up, a burly rancher named Hayes, stepped forward. "That's why we're here, Rourke. Word's already spreading about what happened at the meeting. A lot of folks are tired of Hale pushing everyone around. We want to help. Tomorrow morning we're bringing lumber, tools, and hands. We'll get that barn rebuilt in a week if we work together." Caleb looked stunned. "You don't have to." "We know we don't have to," Hayes interrupted. "We want to. You stood up to Hale. That takes guts. And around here, we don't let a man stand alone when he's doing the right thing." The second man, a younger fellow named Carson, nodded. "Besides, half of us have been waiting for someone to push back. You just gave us permission." Mara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She'd spent so long believing she was alone in the world, that trust and community were illusions. But here, in this harsh and unforgiving place, people were choosing to stand together. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you." Esther clapped him on the shoulder. "Save the thanks for after we finish the work. For now, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The group mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Mara and Caleb standing in the growing darkness. "This is really happening," Mara said quietly. "We might actually win this." Caleb looked at her, and in the fading light, she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Hope. "Yeah," he said. "We might." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mara woke before sunrise, dressed quickly, and headed downstairs to start breakfast. She was surprised to find Caleb already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't want to." He handed her a cup. "Figured I'd get a head start on the day." They drank their coffee in companionable silence, watching through the window as the sky lightened from black to deep blue to pale gold. Just after dawn, the first wagon appeared on the road. Within an hour, the ranch was swarming with people. Hayes had been true to his word. He arrived with 3 loaded wagons full of lumber, nails, and tools. Behind him came a dozen other families, men, women, even children, all ready to work. Esther showed up with food enough to feed an army. Garrett brought architectural plans he'd sketched out the night before. Mara stood on the porch, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people converging on their land, offering help without expectation of payment or reward. "Don't just stand there gawking," Esther called out. "We need someone to organize the cooking. That someone is you." Mara laughed, and descended the steps to join the organized chaos. The day unfolded in a blur of activity. The men worked on clearing the burned debris and laying new foundation posts. The women set up cooking stations and began preparing meals. The children ran supplies back and forth, their excited chatter filling the air with life the ranch hadn't heard in years. Caleb worked alongside the other men, his shirt soaked with sweat, his hands covered in sawdust and dirt. Mara watched him between tasks, noting how different he looked. The hard, frozen quality that had defined him for so long was melting away. He joked with Hayes. He showed young Carson how to properly set a support beam. He smiled. It was like watching someone come back to life. By midday, the foundation was laid and the frame was beginning to take shape. Esther called everyone to break for lunch. They gathered in the yard, sitting on logs and crates, passing around plates of bread, stew, and dried fruit. Mara found herself sitting between Esther and a woman named Margaret, who ran the boarding house's rival establishment on the other side of town. "I have to say," Margaret remarked, "you're not what I expected." Mara raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "Someone running from her past usually looks more haunted. You look determined." "Maybe I'm both," Mara said. Margaret smiled. "Aren't we all?" She leaned in conspiratorially. "Word is, you're the one who convinced Caleb to fight back. Is that true?" "We convinced each other," Mara said honestly. "Neither of us could have done it alone." "That's the best kind of partnership," Margaret said. "The kind where you make each other stronger." Across the yard, Caleb caught Mara's eye. He nodded slightly, and she nodded back, a wordless acknowledgement of everything they'd been through and everything still ahead. As the afternoon wore on, the barn began to rise from the ashes. Walls went up. The roof frame took shape. It wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. Just before sunset, a young boy came running up the road, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Rourke!" he shouted. "Riders coming! Lots of them!" The cheerful atmosphere evaporated instantly. The men reached for tools that could double as weapons. The women gathered the children close. Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the front of the property, Mara right beside him. A line of riders appeared on the ridge, 15, maybe 20 of them. But as they drew closer, Mara realized these weren't Hale's men. At the head of the group was Judge Holloway himself, flanked by 2 territorial marshals. Behind them rode a group of official-looking men in dark suits. Caleb lowered his rifle slowly. "Judge." Holloway dismounted, his expression grave. "Mr. Rourke, Miss Quinn, I apologize for the dramatic arrival, but I thought you'd want to hear this news immediately." "What news?" Garrett asked, stepping forward. One of the marshals pulled out a document. "Victor Hale has been formally charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit arson. We have witness testimony from 3 of his former employees who came forward after yesterday's town meeting. They've provided evidence linking Hale directly to the fire at this ranch, as well as similar incidents at other properties." A stunned silence fell over the gathered crowd. "What does that mean?" Mara asked. "It means Hale is under arrest," Judge Holloway said. "His assets are being frozen pending investigation. All land acquisitions made in the past 3 years are being reviewed. And most importantly for you, Mr. Rourke, it means the threat to your property is over." Caleb looked like he'd been struck. "Over?" "For all intents and purposes, yes. Hale will face trial. If convicted, and given the evidence we have, conviction is all but certain, he'll spend the next decade in territorial prison. His business empire will be dismantled. The land he acquired through fraud will be returned to its rightful owners." A cheer went up from the crowd. People embraced, laughed, cried with relief. Mara felt Caleb's hand find hers, his grip tight. "There's one more thing," Judge Holloway said, raising his voice to be heard over the celebration. "The investigation also uncovered that several of Hale's employees were operating without his direct knowledge. Men who took matters into their own hands, including threats made against Miss Quinn regarding her past." Mara's breath caught. "Those men have also been arrested," Holloway continued. "Furthermore, the debts you were fleeing from, Miss Quinn, they were tied to an illegal gambling operation that's been shut down by federal marshals. The charges against you have been dropped. You're free." The world seemed to tilt. Mara's knees buckled, and Caleb's arm came around her waist, holding her steady. "Say that again," she whispered. "You're free," Judge Holloway repeated gently. "The past no longer has any claim on you." Mara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of 2 years, 2 years of running, hiding, looking over her shoulder, finally lifted. Caleb pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing with relief and joy and disbelief all at once. The crowd gave them space, their celebration continuing around them, but allowing this moment to belong to just the two of them. "It's over," Caleb murmured into her hair. "It's really over." "I can't believe it," Mara said, her voice muffled. "I thought I'd be running forever." "Not anymore." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes fierce. "You're home now, and you're staying." It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Mara said, smiling through her tears. "I'm staying." The celebration lasted well into the night. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else brought out a jug of whiskey. The children danced while the adults told stories and laughed and allowed themselves to believe for the first time in years that things might actually get better. Mara found herself swept up in the festivities, dancing with Hayes, then Garrett, then a dozen other men who wanted to congratulate her. But every time she looked across the yard, her eyes found Caleb. He was standing near the half-built barn, talking with Judge Holloway and the marshals, but his gaze kept drifting back to her. Finally, as the night grew late and people began to pack up their wagons and head home, Caleb made his way through the crowd to her side. "Walk with me?" he asked. Mara nodded. They walked away from the house, away from the noise and light, out toward the hill where the land sloped upward toward the stars. The air was cold and clean, sharp with the scent of sage and juniper. When they reached the crest of the hill, Caleb stopped. In the moonlight, Mara could see two simple wooden crosses marking graves, Anna and Lily. "I come up here sometimes," Caleb said quietly, "just to talk, to remember." Mara said nothing, giving him space. "I told them about you," he continued, "about the woman who showed up one day and refused to be scared off. The woman who made me remember what it felt like to care about something again." He turned to face her. "I think they'd like you." Mara's throat tightened. "I wish I could have known them." "So do I." Caleb reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. "But I'm grateful I know you. I'm grateful you stayed when every rational bone in your body told you to run. I'm grateful you fought for this place like it mattered." "It does matter," Mara said. "You matter. So do you." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I spent 3 years convinced I'd never feel anything again. That grief was all I had left, and then you walked through those gates and proved me wrong." Mara's heart was racing. "Caleb, I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I know it's fast. I know we've got 1,000 reasons to take this slow, but I'm done wasting time. I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. I love you, Mara Quinn, and I want you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, as my partner, my equal, my—" Mara kissed him. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, cutting off the words she didn't need to hear because she already knew them, already felt them. Caleb made a sound low in his throat and pulled her close, one hand tangling in her hair, the other splayed across her back. The kiss was everything, desperate and tender, fierce and gentle, a promise and a question all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since the night you poured out that whiskey and chose to keep living." Caleb laughed, the sound rough and joyful. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "The best kind," Mara said, echoing Margaret's words from earlier, "the kind that makes each other stronger." They stood together on the hill, wrapped in each other's arms. The ranch spread out below them like a promise of the future they would build together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. The barn was completed in record time, stronger and more functional than the original. Caleb and Mara worked side by side, establishing routines, making plans, slowly transforming the ranch from a monument to grief into a working, thriving property. News of Hale's arrest spread throughout the territory. The trial was swift and decisive. Hale was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His property was liquidated, the proceeds distributed among the people he'd defrauded over the years. Several ranchers whose land had been stolen received their deeds back. Others received financial compensation. The balance of power in the county shifted dramatically, and for the first time in years, people could operate without fear. Caleb became something of a local hero, though he deflected the attention whenever possible. "I didn't do anything special," he'd say. "I just stopped hiding." But people knew better. They knew it took courage to stand up to a man like Hale. They knew it took strength to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. And they knew Mara had been a part of that fight every step of the way. Her story, the truth she'd told at the town meeting, became a rallying cry for others who'd been running from their pasts. People started opening up, sharing their own struggles, finding solidarity and honesty. Esther took to calling Mara the woman who saved Red Hollow, which made Mara laugh every time. "I didn't save anything," she'd protest. "Maybe not," Esther would reply. "But you sure as hell woke us up." On a cold morning in early December, Mara stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Caleb came downstairs carrying something wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" she asked. He set it on the table and unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple gold, slightly tarnished, with a small diamond that caught the morning light. "It was my grandmother's," Caleb said. "My mother gave it to me when Anna and I got married. After Anna died, I put it away. Couldn't stand to look at it." Mara's heart began to race. Caleb picked up the ring, turning it over in his fingers. "But I took it out last night, cleaned it up, and I realized something." He looked at her, his eyes steady and sure. "This ring isn't about the past anymore. It's about the future, about the life I want to build, the person I want to build it with." He held out the ring. "Mara Quinn, will you marry me?" Mara's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, the smell of coffee and possibility filling the air. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb smiled, a real, genuine, unguarded smile. "We should tell people," he said. "Let's wait," Mara said, "just for a little while. Let's keep this moment for ourselves." Caleb nodded, pulling her close again. "Deal." They stood together in the quiet of the kitchen, two broken people who'd found each other in the ruins and chosen to rebuild something beautiful. Outside, the land stretched wide and unforgiving under the winter sky. But inside, there was warmth, there was love, there was hope. And for the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 57 days, Caleb Rourke wasn't counting anymore. He was just living. They kept the engagement secret for 3 days. Not because they wanted to hide it, but because those first 72 hours belonged to them alone. Stolen moments of quiet joy in a world that had been too loud and violent for too long. They worked the ranch during the day, falling into an easy rhythm of shared labor and unspoken understanding. At night, they sat together by the fire, making plans, dreaming out loud about the future they would build. Mara would catch herself staring at the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that had once belonged to Caleb's grandmother, now warm against her skin like a promise kept. Sometimes she'd turn it slowly, watching how it caught the firelight, still half convinced she'd wake up and find this had all been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. Caleb was real. The ranch was real. The love growing between them was as solid and tangible as the earth beneath their feet. On the 4th morning, Esther showed up unannounced. She took one look at Mara's hand as she accepted a cup of coffee and let out a whoop that could be heard across 3 counties. "I knew it!" she shouted, grabbing Mara's hand and examining the ring with eyes that sparkled with vindication. "I told Margaret just last week. I said those two are going to end up married, mark my words." "And did she believe me?" "No, she said I was getting ahead of myself, that they'd barely known each other 6 months. But I knew. I always know these things." "We haven't set a date yet," Mara said, laughing despite her embarrassment. "Don't care. This calls for a celebration." Esther released Mara's hand and turned to Caleb, who stood in the doorway looking vaguely uncomfortable with all the fuss. "You did good, Rourke, real good. Though it took you long enough. I was starting to think you'd never get around to asking." "I wanted to make sure she'd say yes," Caleb said, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile. "Please, that woman would have walked through fire for you, still would." Esther turned back to Mara. "Now, when's the wedding? Spring? Summer? Please tell me you're not planning one of those long engagements where you wait 2 years just to make it proper and respectable." Mara glanced at Caleb. They hadn't discussed timing yet, but something in his expression told her they were thinking the same thing. Life was too short. They'd both learned that lesson the hard way. Soon, Mara said firmly, we've both spent too much time waiting for life to start. We don't want to wait anymore. Esther's eyes softened, the teasing edge leaving her voice. That's the smartest thing I've heard all year. She clapped her hands together with the authority of a general marshaling troops. All right, I'm taking charge of this. You two just show up on the day looking presentable. I'll handle everything else. Esther, you don't have to. I absolutely do have to. You think I'm going to let the woman who saved this town and the man who finally stood up to Victor Hale have some sad little ceremony with no one there to witness it? Not a chance. She was already heading for her wagon, her mind clearly racing with plans. I'm thinking late January. Gives us enough time to plan something proper without dragging it out. Sound good? Mara looked at Caleb, who shrugged with the resigned acceptance of a man who knew when he was outmatched. Sounds perfect, he said. Esther grinned triumphantly. Good. Now get back to work. Love doesn't pay the bills, and that north fence isn't going to mend itself. She drove off in a cloud of dust, leaving Mara and Caleb standing in the yard. I think we just lost control of our own wedding, Mara observed. Small price to pay, Caleb said, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. As long as you show up, I don't care what else happens. I'll show up, Mara promised, turning in his arms to face him properly. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, two people who'd found each other in the ruins and decided to build something beautiful. Word spread through Red Hollow like wildfire in dry grass. By evening, half the town knew about the engagement. By the next morning, the other half had heard. People stopped by the ranch all week, some bringing congratulations, others bringing gifts, all of them wanting to be part of the story that was already becoming legend. Margaret brought fine fabric for a wedding dress, pale blue silk she'd been saving for something special. I knew the day I met you that you were going to need this, she said, pressing the bolt of fabric into Mara's hands. I just had a feeling. Hayes donated a side of beef for the reception and offered to handle all the meat preparation. Consider it a wedding gift, he said gruffly, uncomfortable with sentiment but genuine in his pleasure. Garrett offered to stand as witness and brought a bottle of aged whiskey that had been in his family for 3 generations. For the toast, he explained. Some occasions deserve the good stuff. Even young Carson showed up, shy and proud as he presented a hand-carved wooden frame. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out. For your wedding photograph, he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Figured you'd want something nice to put it in. I know it's not much, but I made it myself and... It's perfect, Mara interrupted, accepting the frame with genuine warmth. Thank you, Carson. This means more than you know. The boy's face lit up, and he ducked his head to hide his pleased smile before hurrying back to his horse. Mara was overwhelmed by the generosity, by the way the community had embraced them both. She'd spent so long believing she'd never belong anywhere, that her past would always mark her as an outsider, someone to be whispered about and kept at arm's length. But here, in this harsh and unforgiving place, she'd found acceptance. More than that, she'd found family. That night, as she and Caleb sat together after dinner, she tried to put the feeling into words. I don't understand it, she said, staring at the collection of gifts that had accumulated on the kitchen table. Why do they care so much? Most of these people barely know me. Caleb reached over and took her hand. They know enough. They know you stood up when you could have run. They know you fought beside me when fighting meant risking everything. And they know you told the truth about your past, even when it would have been easier to keep lying. He squeezed her fingers gently. That's more than enough for folks around here. Actions matter more than words, and your actions have spoken pretty loud. Our actions, Mara corrected. We did this together. Together, Caleb agreed, and the word felt like another kind of vow. The preparations for the wedding consumed the next few weeks. Esther turned out to be a force of nature when it came to planning, approaching the task with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else in her life. She commandeered the community hall, organized a cleaning crew of volunteers, recruited musicians from as far as 30 miles away, and personally oversaw every detail from the flowers to the food to the precise arrangement of chairs. This wedding is going to be perfect, she declared to anyone who would listen. I don't care if I have to work miracles to make it happen. These two deserve something beautiful after everything they've been through. Mara tried to help, but Esther shooed her away every time. You've got a ranch to run and a dress to fit. Let me handle this. I've been planning weddings since before you were born, and I know what I'm doing. And so Mara focused on the land, on the daily rhythm of work that kept Iron Ridge thriving. The new barn was fully operational now, stocked with fresh hay and well-maintained equipment. The fences had been repaired and reinforced. The livestock was healthy and multiplying. The house, once a tomb of grief and silence, was now a home, filled with light and warmth and the promise of the future. She and Caleb fell into their routines with the ease of people who'd been working together for years rather than months. He'd wake before dawn and start the coffee while she gathered eggs from the chickens. They'd have breakfast together, discussing the day's tasks, then split up to handle different aspects of the ranch work. Around midday, they'd meet back at the house for a quick lunch, then return to their separate tasks until evening. But it was the evenings Mara loved most. That quiet time after the work was done, when they'd sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Caleb was opening up more now, sharing stories about his childhood, about Anna and Lily, about the dreams he'd had before grief had stolen them all away. And Mara found herself sharing too. Not just the facts of her past, those she'd already laid bare, but the feelings beneath them, the fear and shame that had driven her for so long, the loneliness that had become so familiar she'd almost stopped noticing it, the belief that she was somehow broken beyond repair. "You're not broken," Caleb told her one night after she'd confessed this fear. "You're scarred, yeah. We both are. But scars just mean you survived something that tried to kill you. They're proof of strength, not weakness." "When did you get so wise?" Mara asked, trying to lighten the mood. "About 3 months ago," Caleb said with a slight smile, "when a stubborn woman showed up and refused to let me stay dead inside." One cold afternoon in early January, while Caleb was in town picking up supplies, Mara found herself standing in the hallway upstairs, looking at the door to Lily's room. It stood open now, no longer chained shut. Caleb had started going in there occasionally, sitting in the rocking chair by the window, allowing himself to remember without drowning in the grief. Mara stepped inside carefully, respectfully, as if entering sacred ground. The room still looked much as it had the first time she'd seen it. The small bed with its carved wooden posts, the toys arranged on the shelf, the pale yellow walls that caught the afternoon light. But there was something different now. The air didn't feel stagnant anymore. The stillness wasn't suffocating. It felt peaceful rather than haunted. She walked to the window and looked out over the land, seeing what Lily must have seen every morning. The sweep of the horizon, the distant mountains, the vast sky that made everything feel both infinite and intimate. "I wish I'd known you," Mara said softly to the empty room, feeling only slightly foolish talking to a ghost. "Your father talks about you sometimes when he's ready. About how much you loved stories, about how bright and funny you were, about how you used to help your mother in the garden and collect pretty rocks from the creek." She paused, running her hand along the windowsill, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers. "I'm gonna marry him, your father. I hope that's all right with you. I promise I'll take care of him. I promise I'll never try to replace your mother or pretend she didn't exist. I just want to give him a reason to keep living, to keep hoping for good things. I think that's what she would have wanted too." The room was silent, but Mara felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, as if somewhere beyond hearing, her words had been received and accepted. She stood there for a few more minutes, memorizing the details of the space, honoring the little girl who'd once called it home. When she finally left, she closed the door quietly, but left it unlocked. No longer a shrine to be preserved unchanged, but a room that could breathe and perhaps someday serve a new purpose. When Caleb returned that evening, she told him where she'd been and what she'd said. "I went into Lily's room today," she said, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of amber and rose. "I hope that was all right. I didn't touch anything, I just talked to her." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this. "What did you say?" "I told her about us, about the wedding, about how I promised to take care of you." Mara glanced at him uncertainly. "Is that strange? Does it bother you?" "No," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. No, it's not strange at all. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Thank you for honoring her memory, for not being afraid of my past or asking me to pretend it didn't happen. Your past is part of you, Mara said simply. Anna and Lily shaped who you are. I could never ask you to forget them, and I wouldn't want to. They were loved, and they loved you, and that matters. That's always going to matter. Caleb pulled her close, pressing his face into her hair, and Mara felt the shudder that went through him. Not grief this time, but relief. The relief of being truly understood and accepted, past and all. They sat in silence as darkness fell, their hands linked, their hearts beginning to beat in the same steady rhythm that would carry them through all the years to come. The wedding was set for January 28th, a cold, bright Saturday that dawned clear and crisp. Mara woke before sunrise in the small room at Esther's boarding house, where she'd spent the previous night according to tradition. The first thing she noticed was the absence of weight on her left hand. She'd removed the engagement ring the night before so it could be placed on her finger again during the ceremony, making the moment complete. She lay in the unfamiliar bed for a moment, watching the pre-dawn light creep across the ceiling, and felt a curious mixture of calm and excitement. In a few hours, she would marry Caleb Rourke. She would stand in front of the entire town and pledge her life to his. She would become part of something larger than her soul, not just a wife, but a partner, a fellow builder of the future. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. You awake in there? Esther's voice called. We've got work to do, Mara smiled. I'm awake. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Margaret and Esther descended on her with the efficiency of a military operation, helping her bathe in water scented with lavender, then dressing her carefully in the pale blue dress Margaret had sewn. The fabric was beautiful, simple but elegant, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs that Margaret had painstakingly completed by candlelight over many late nights. You've outdone yourself, Mara said, running her hands over the fine stitching. This is too beautiful. Nonsense, Margaret said briskly, though she looked pleased. A woman only gets married once. Well, ideally once. And she deserves to look her best. Now hold still while I fix your hair. Margaret and Esther worked together, pinning Mara's dark hair up in an elegant style, weaving in small white flowers they'd somehow managed to procure in the dead of winter. Mara didn't ask where they'd found them. She suspected Esther had called in favors from every contact she had within 100 miles. When they finally stepped back to admire their work, Mara barely recognized herself in the small mirror. Gone was the haunted, exhausted woman who'd walked into Red Hollow 6 months ago with nothing but a canvas bag and a head full of secrets. In her place stood someone stronger, calmer, more certain of who she was and where she belonged. You look beautiful, Margaret said softly, genuine warmth in her voice. Mara stared at her reflection, at this new version of herself, or perhaps not new, but reclaimed. The woman she might have been all along if life hadn't beaten her down quite so hard. Nervous? Esther asked, watching her closely. No, Mara said, and was surprised by how true it was. I'm not nervous at all. I'm ready. Good, Esther said with satisfaction. Because that man of yours has been pacing the community hall for the past hour, driving everyone crazy. If we don't get you over there soon, he's going to wear a hole clean through the floor. The community hall was only a short walk from the boarding house, but they took a wagon anyway to protect Mara's dress from the dust and cold. As they approached, Mara could hear the murmur of voices inside. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out for the occasion. The building had been transformed. Through the windows, Mara could see garlands of evergreen hanging from the rafters, candles flickering on every available surface. Someone had even found red ribbon to tie in bows along the pews. It looked magical, far more elaborate than anything she'd expected. Esther, you didn't have to go to all this trouble, Mara said, her throat tight. Wasn't just me, Esther replied, pulling the wagon to a stop. Whole town pitched in. You'd be surprised how many people wanted to help make this day special for you two. Garrett met them at the door, looking uncomfortable but dignified in what was clearly his best suit. He offered Mara his arm with solemn formality. Ready? He asked. More than ready, Mara assured him. The doors opened. The small crowd inside rose to their feet, and there, at the front of the room beside Judge Holloway, stood Caleb. He wore a dark suit Mara had never seen before, probably borrowed, given how perfectly it fit, and his hair was neatly combed for once, his face clean-shaven. But it was his eyes that held her completely. Those winter river eyes that had once been so cold and empty were now bright with emotion so intense it took her breath away. Mara walked down the aisle slowly, taking in every face. Hayes and his whole family, dressed in their Sunday best. Margaret dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Young Carson trying to look grown-up and stoic but failing to hide his pleased grin. Judge Holloway looking dignified and official. Even some of the ranch hands who'd helped rebuild the barn had cleaned up and come to witness this moment, all of them smiling, all of them genuinely happy to be here. When she reached Caleb, Garrett carefully transferred her hand from his arm to Caleb's, and she felt Caleb's fingers trembling slightly as they closed around hers. "You showed up," Caleb said quietly, just for her, echoing the words from their engagement. "Wild horses," Mara reminded him, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed his whole face. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying easily through the packed hall, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of two lives, two hearts, two souls, who have found in each other exactly what they needed most." He paused, looking in between Mara and Caleb with something like fatherly approval. "I've known Caleb Rourke for many years. I knew him when he first came to this territory with his young bride, full of dreams and determination. I knew him through joy and through devastating loss. And I've watched him over these past few years, seen him hollow himself out with grief, seen him become a ghost haunting his own life." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "And then," Judge Holloway continued, "this woman arrived, Mara Quinn, who had her own ghosts, her own grief, her own reasons to give up on the world. But instead of two broken people dragging each other down, something remarkable happened. They lifted each other up. They fought for each other and with each other. They proved that the human spirit, when it finds the right companion, is stronger than any darkness." He opened the book in his hands, though Mara suspected he wasn't actually reading from it. "Marriage is many things. It's a legal contract, yes, it's a social institution, but at its heart, it's a promise. A promise to stand together against whatever the world throws at you. To be honest even when honesty is hard. To be kind even when kindness isn't convenient. To choose each other, day after day, even when that choice requires sacrifice." Judge Holloway looked at Caleb. "Do you, Caleb James Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to honor her, to support her, to stand beside her through whatever joys and sorrows life may bring? Do you promise to be her partner in all things, from this day forward, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Caleb said, his voice steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Mara's face. "And do you, Mara Elizabeth Quinn," Judge Holloway turned to her, "take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to honor him, to support him, to stand beside him through whatever joys and sorrows life may bring? Do you promise to be his partner in all things, from this day forward, for as long as you both shall live?" Mara's throat tightened. Elizabeth, her real name, spoken aloud in front of all these people without shame or fear, reclaimed and made new. "I do," she said clearly, and felt the weight of 2 years of running finally completely lift from her shoulders. Judge Holloway smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by this territory and these good people who witness this union, I pronounce you husband and wife." He looked at Caleb. "You may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped Mara's face in his hands with infinite gentleness and kissed her softly, tenderly, as the room erupted in applause and cheers and whistles. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Holloway announced, raising his voice to be heard over the celebration, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Rourke." More cheers. Garrett pumped Caleb's hand enthusiastically. Esther hugged Mara so tightly she could barely breathe. Young Carson produced a handful of rice from somewhere and threw it over them both, laughing at his own audacity. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Mara had ever experienced. Tables appeared as if by magic, laden with food that seemed to multiply impossibly. Roasted meats and fresh bread, preserves and pies, vegetables prepared a dozen different ways. The musicians Esther had recruited struck up a lively tune, and people started dancing almost immediately, pulling the newlyweds into the center of the floor. Mara found herself swept from one partner to another. Hayes teaching her the steps to a complicated reel, Garrett spinning her with surprising grace, even Judge Holloway claiming a dance and proving he was lighter on his feet than his dignified demeanor suggested. But always, always, her eyes found Caleb across the room. And every time, he was looking back at her with that same expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real, that she was his, and he was hers, and they got to keep each other. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Mara managed to slip away from the crowd for a moment, stepping outside to catch her breath. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. The air was cold and sharp, clearing the pleasant fog of music and warmth from her head. The door opened behind her. She turned, expecting Esther or Margaret, but it was Caleb who emerged, carrying 2 glasses of cider. "Hiding from your own wedding?" he asked, offering her a glass. "Just taking it all in," Mara said, accepting the drink. 6 months ago, I was running for my life, convinced I'd never stop looking over my shoulder. And now? She gestured at the hall behind them, at the sounds of music and laughter spilling out into the winter evening. Now I have all of this. A home, a family, a husband. She tested the word, feeling how it fit in her mouth. It doesn't seem real. Caleb moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "It's real," he said firmly. "We're real. This is happening, and no one can take it away from us." "I know," Mara said. "I just keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to show up and ruin it." "They won't," Caleb promised. "Hale's in prison. Your past is settled. We're free, Mara. Free to just live." He set down his glass and took her free hand in both of his. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. Happy, hopeful, like the future was something to look forward to instead of something to just survive." "Neither did I," Mara admitted, setting her own glass aside so she could face him properly. "For so long I was just trying to get through each day. I didn't let myself think about tomorrow, let alone next week or next year. It hurt too much to hope for anything." "And now?" Caleb asked softly. "Now I can't stop thinking about the future," Mara said, a smile tugging at her lips. "About all the things we're going to do, the ranch we're going to build, the life we're going to make. I want all of it, Caleb, every ordinary, beautiful day." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, the promise of 1,000 more kisses to come. Behind them, someone inside the hall started cheering, and they broke apart laughing to find half the party watching them through the windows. "I think they want us back," Mara observed. "Let them wait," Caleb said, but he was grinning as he said it, and they went back inside together, hand in hand, ready to rejoin their celebration. The party lasted well into the evening. As the light faded and lamps were lit, the music shifted from lively reels to slower, more romantic melodies. Caleb claimed Mara for a proper dance, holding her close as they swayed together in the center of the floor. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For saying yes, for staying, for making me believe in second chances." Mara pulled back just enough to look at him. "You gave me a second chance first. You took me in when no one else would. You saw past all the reasons to send me away and gave me a place to belong." "We saved each other," Caleb said simply. "Yeah," Mara agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "We did." As the evening grew late and the crowd finally began to thin, people departing in wagons and on horseback with promises to visit soon, Esther cornered the newlyweds one last time. "You two did good today," she said, her voice thick with the emotion she'd been holding back all day. "Real good." This was exactly the kind of celebration this town needed. Reminded us all that good things can still happen, even after hard times. "We couldn't have done any of it without you," Mara said, pulling Esther into a fierce hug. "Thank you. For everything, for believing in us, for fighting for us, for making this day so perfect." Esther returned the embrace tightly, then pulled back and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Oh, stop. You're going to make me cry and I've got a reputation to maintain." She waved them away with feigned gruffness. "Now go on. Get out of here. Start your new life together. And don't be strangers. I expect to see you both in town regularly." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said with mock solemnity, and Esther swatted his arm before shooing them toward the door. They climbed onto the wagon Caleb had brought from the ranch, and as they pulled away from the hall, Mara looked back one last time at the glowing building, at the few remaining figures silhouetted in the doorway waving goodbye. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Rourke?" Caleb asked, and Mara loved the way he said her new name, like it was something precious. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I'm ready." The ride back to Iron Ridge took nearly an hour in the darkness, but Mara didn't mind. She sat close to Caleb on the wagon bench, tucked under his arm, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but she was warm where she pressed against him, and the discomfort only made her more aware of being alive, being present in this moment. When they finally pulled up to the ranch, Caleb helped her down from the wagon with exaggerated ceremony, then surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" Mara laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Caleb said, as if this should be obvious. "It's tradition." "Since when do you care about tradition?" "Since about 5 minutes ago," Caleb admitted, and carried her up the porch steps and through the door, both of them laughing like children. He set her down carefully in the front hall, and for a moment they just stood there, grinning at each other in the lamplight like fools. "We're married," Mara said wonderingly. "We are," Caleb confirmed. "We're really married." "Yes, we are." "Huh," Mara said, then launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him soundly. They stumbled toward the stairs, still kissing, unwilling to separate even for the few moments it would take to climb to their bedroom. Their bedroom, Mara thought with a thrill, not his or hers, but theirs. Shared. Together. That night, they made love with the urgency of people who'd waited too long and the tenderness of people who had all the time in the world. And afterward, lying tangled in each other's arms, Mara felt something she'd never quite experienced before. A sense of absolute rightness, of being exactly where she was supposed to be with exactly the person she was meant to be with. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb replied, his voice drowsy but content. "Always will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, neither of them had nightmares. The winter passed in a blur of quiet domesticity and steady work. Mara and Caleb fell into the rhythm of married life with surprising ease, as if they'd been doing this for decades, rather than weeks. They woke together each morning, often before dawn, and would lie in bed for a few stolen minutes, just talking or not talking, simply being together. Then the day would begin in earnest. Caleb would start the coffee while Mara dressed and made her way downstairs. They'd have breakfast together, discussing the day's tasks and any challenges that needed addressing. The ranch required constant attention, animals to feed, fences to mend, equipment to maintain, accounts to balance. But the work felt different now, lighter. Before, the ranch had been Caleb's burden, a responsibility he shouldered alone because he had no choice. Now it was their shared project, something they built together with purpose and care. Caleb took on 2 ranch hands in late February, brothers named Tom and William, who'd recently arrived in the territory looking for work. They were young and inexperienced, but eager to learn, and Caleb proved to be a patient teacher. With their help, he was able to focus more attention on breeding better livestock and improving the irrigation system that fed water from the creek to the various pastures. Mara, meanwhile, expanded the vegetable garden that had been neglected for years, turning over the soil and planning what she'd plant come spring. She also started raising chickens in a coop Tom and William helped her build, and within a few weeks she was producing more eggs than the ranch could use. She began selling the surplus in town, establishing a small but steady stream of additional income. They made improvements to the house as well, tackling projects that had been ignored during Caleb's years of grief. They replaced the worn curtains in the windows with new fabric Margaret had found. They painted over the water stains on the ceiling where rain had leaked through. They repaired the loose boards on the front porch and fixed the shutters that had been hanging crooked for years. Slowly but surely, they were erasing the last traces of neglect and despair, replacing them with signs of life and care and love. In early March, as the snow began to melt and the first tentative signs of spring appeared, shoots of green pushing through the mud, birds returning from their winter migrations, Mara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Once, then twice. She waited another week to be sure, then made an announcement one morning over breakfast. "I'm pregnant." Caleb froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, his eyes going wide. What? I'm pregnant, Mara repeated, unable to keep the smile off her face despite her nerves. About 2 months along, I think. Maybe closer to 3. The cup clattered onto the table, forgotten. Caleb stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, overwhelming joy that transformed his entire face. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I'm sure. All the signs are there. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and crossed to her side of the table. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. A baby, he said, the words muffled against her hair, repeated like a prayer or an incantation. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Mara asked, though she could already feel the answer in the way he held her, in the fine tremor running through his body. Happy? Caleb pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Mara, I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I'm completely unprepared, and I'm happier than I ever thought I'd be again. His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach, his palm warm through the fabric of her dress. A baby, our baby. They stood together in the kitchen for a long time, just holding each other, letting the reality of it sink in. A new life growing between them, a future taking shape. Finally, Mara pulled back and looked up at him seriously. I know this brings up painful memories. Lily is gone, Caleb interrupted gently but firmly. And I'll always love her, always miss her. But this baby... He pressed his hand more firmly against Mara's stomach. This baby is a gift, a new beginning. It doesn't replace what I lost. Nothing could. But it gives me something to look forward to, something to hope for. You're sure? Mara needed him to be sure, needed to know this wouldn't break him. I'm sure, Caleb said. I want this, Mara. I want our child. I want to be a father again. And this time, his voice caught slightly. This time I'm going to appreciate every single moment. I'm not going to take a single day for granted. Mara kissed him then, soft and sweet, sealing the promise between them. Over the next few days, they discussed practical matters. They would need to prepare a nursery, acquire baby clothes and supplies, make arrangements with the midwife in town. But there was another conversation they needed to have, one that Caleb initiated one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. I want to do something, he said carefully, something I should have done a long time ago, but I need to know you're comfortable with it first. What is it? Mara asked. He took her hand, squeezing gently. I want to turn Lily's room into the nursery for our baby. Mara's breath caught. She'd been wondering about this, had thought perhaps they'd use one of the other empty bedrooms, leave Lily's room undisturbed. Are you sure? She asked. I don't want you to feel like you're erasing her memory. I'm not erasing anything, Caleb said firmly, but I also don't want to turn that room into a shrine that can never change. Lily's gone, but her memory lives in my heart, not in a locked room, and I think... His voice grew softer. I think Anna would want it this way, would want new life in that space, would want our child to grow up surrounded by love, the way Lily was. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. If you're sure, then yes. I think it's a beautiful idea. Over the next few weeks, they carefully, lovingly transformed the room. They kept a few special items. Lily's favorite doll, which they placed on a high shelf, and the wooden horse Caleb had carved for her, which would eventually be passed down to their child. But they repainted the pale yellow walls a soft green that would work for a boy or a girl. They brought in a new cradle that Hayes and Caleb built together in the barn, working side by side in comfortable silence. Margaret sewed new curtains and baby blankets. Esther contributed a rocking chair she claimed had been gathering dust in her attic, but which Mara suspected she'd purchased specifically for this purpose. The transformation took nearly a month, but when it was done, the room felt perfect, respectful of the past but open to the future, a bridge between what had been and what was to come. One evening, as Caleb stood in the doorway surveying their work, Mara came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. She would have loved being a big sister, she said softly. Caleb covered her hands with his own. Yeah, he agreed, his voice thick. She would have. They stood there together, honoring the child who was gone while preparing for the one who was coming, and somehow it felt exactly right. Spring arrived in full force, bringing with it an explosion of new life and new challenges. The ranch was busier than ever as calving season began. Caleb and his 2 ranch hands worked around the clock, checking on expectant cows, assisting with difficult births, caring for the new calves that seemed to arrive almost daily. Mara helped when she could, though Caleb worried constantly about her overexerting herself. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she'd remind him patiently. "Women have been doing farm work while pregnant since the beginning of time." "I know," Caleb would reply. "But you're carrying precious cargo, our precious cargo. I just want to make sure you're both safe." It was hard to be annoyed when he put it like that. News of the pregnancy spread through Red Hollow with the same speed as the news of their engagement and wedding had. People started showing up at the ranch bringing gifts, hand-me-down baby clothes, carved toys, advice both solicited and unsolicited. Margaret began sewing a complete layette, appearing every week with new items, tiny gowns, soft blankets, impossibly small socks and caps. "A baby needs to be kept warm," she'd say, as if this explained her determination to ensure their child would have enough clothes to last through several winters. Esther showed up regularly with remedies for morning sickness, predictions about the baby's gender, and opinions on everything from diet to exercise to how Mara should be sleeping. "It's a girl," she declared confidently when Mara's belly finally started to show in late April. "I can always tell by the way a woman carries. High and round like that, definitely a girl." "And if you're wrong?" Mara asked, amused by Esther's certainty. "I'm never wrong about these things," Esther replied with the confidence of someone who'd probably been wrong plenty of times but chose not to remember those instances. In May, representatives from the territorial government arrived in Red Hollow. Victor Hale's conviction had sent ripples through the territory, exposing a network of corruption and fraud that extended far beyond one county. Now there was a push for reform, for new laws and systems that would prevent another Hale from rising to power. Judge Holloway invited Caleb and several other ranchers to participate in forming a local water management council that would oversee fair distribution of water rights and prevent the kind of monopolistic control Hale had attempted. "Your experience fighting Hale makes your perspective valuable," Holloway explained during the first meeting. "We need people who understand what's at stake and aren't afraid to stand up for what's right." Caleb agreed to participate, but he insisted Mara be part of the discussions as well. "She fought just as hard as I did," he said firmly. "She deserves a voice in this." Some of the older ranchers bristled at the idea of a woman having equal say, but Judge Holloway supported Caleb's position, and eventually the objections faded. Mara proved herself quickly, bringing a practical perspective and a willingness to ask questions others were too proud to ask. The meetings were held twice a month and often ran long, filled with debate and negotiation as the group worked to create bylaws and regulations that would protect everyone's interests fairly. It was slow, tedious work, nothing like the dramatic confrontation with Hale, but it mattered just as much. They were building something that would outlast them all, creating a foundation for a more just system. Through it all, Mara's pregnancy progressed. She felt the baby move for the first time in mid-June, a flutter so faint she almost missed it. By July, the movements had become stronger, more insistent, and Caleb would spend entire evenings with his hand on her belly, feeling their child kick and turn. "Strong," he'd say with satisfaction, just like the mother. The summer was brutally hot, and Mara struggled with the heat and the increasing weight she carried. Simple tasks became exhausting. Her ankles swelled, her back ached constantly. She had trouble sleeping, unable to find a comfortable position. But every time she felt frustrated or overwhelmed, she'd feel the baby move and remember what all of this discomfort was for. She was growing a human being, creating new life. It was worth every moment of difficulty. In late July, on a day so hot the air shimmered and seemed to ripple with heat, Mara's water broke while she was in the kitchen preparing lunch. She stood there for a moment, staring down at the puddle on the floor, her mind blank with shock, even though she'd known this moment was coming. Then the first contraction hit, stealing her breath. "Caleb!" she called out, trying to keep her voice level and failing. "Caleb, I need you!" He'd been out mending fences with Tom and William. Later, he'd tell her that he'd never run so fast in his entire life, that his heart had been in his throat the whole way back to the house, terrified he'd arrived to find something had gone wrong, But when he burst through the kitchen door, breathless and wild-eyed, he found Mara leaning against the counter, breathing through another contraction, scared but fundamentally all right. "It's time," she said unnecessarily. Caleb's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. For a moment he just stood there, frozen, and Mara almost laughed despite the pain. "Caleb," she said firmly, "I need you to breathe and focus. Can you do that?" He nodded jerkily. "Yes." "Right. Okay." He seemed to shake himself. "Okay, Tom," he shouted toward the barn. "Ride to town and fetch Ruth. Tell her the baby's coming. Hurry." Tom took off at a run, and Caleb turned his attention back to Mara. He helped her to their bedroom, moving with exaggerated care as if she might shatter. He got her settled on the bed, brought water and towels, and tried very hard to look calm and competent while clearly being neither. Ruth, the midwife, arrived within 2 hours. She'd been in town when Tom found her, which was fortunate. She was a capable woman in her late 50s who'd delivered more babies than she could count, and her presence immediately brought a sense of order and calm to the proceedings. She examined Mara efficiently, then looked up with a slight smile. "You've got a while yet, dear. First babies like to take their time. Might as well settle in for the afternoon." "How long?" Mara asked. "Could be hours. Could be most of the night. Babies come on their own schedule, not ours." Ruth's prediction proved accurate. The contractions continued, growing stronger and closer together as the afternoon wore into evening. Caleb stayed by Mara's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement even when she snapped at him to be quiet. At one point, Ruth tried to send him out of the room. "This isn't really something for husbands to witness," she said delicately. "Why don't you wait downstairs? I'll call you when it's over." "I'm staying," Caleb said flatly, in a tone that brooked no argument. Ruth looked at Mara, who managed a tired smile. "Let him stay. I want him here." So Caleb stayed, and Mara was grateful for it even in the worst moments when the pain was overwhelming and she was sure she couldn't possibly continue. His presence anchored her, reminded her why she was doing this. Night fell. The contractions intensified. Mara lost track of time, existing only in the moments between pains, trying to gather her strength for the next wave. And then finally, Ruth said the words she'd been waiting for. "All right, Mara, it's time to push. Next contraction, I want you to bear down as hard as you can." What followed was the hardest work Mara had ever done. Pushing took all her strength, all her will, every ounce of determination she possessed. She'd thought she understood effort after months of ranch work, but this was different. This was her body doing something it had never done before, performing a miracle that was also an ordeal. Caleb stayed beside her the whole time, letting her crush his hand, offering water when she could drink, words of encouragement when she could hear them. And then, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, she heard it, a cry, sharp, indignant, full of life. "It's a girl," Ruth announced, her voice warm with satisfaction. A beautiful, healthy girl. Mara collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, tears streaming down her face. A girl, a daughter. Ruth worked quickly, cleaning and wrapping the baby in soft blankets. Then she placed the bundle carefully in Mara's arms. Mara looked down at the tiny face, wrinkled and red, eyes squeezed shut, one small fist pressed against her cheek, and felt her heart crack wide open with love so intense it was almost frightening. "She's perfect," she whispered. Caleb, who'd been standing frozen beside the bed, slowly reached out and gently touched one tiny hand. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "She's really here," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "Our daughter is really here." "Would you like to hold her?" Mara asked. Caleb nodded mutely. Mara carefully transferred the precious bundle into his arms and watched as her husband's face transformed with joy and terror and overwhelming love. He'd been here before, she knew, had held his daughter Lily just like this once, and the fact that he was willing to open his heart again, to risk this kind of love, after knowing how devastating its loss could be, that took a courage Mara could barely comprehend. "Hello, little one," Caleb murmured to the baby, his voice gentle in a way Mara had never quite heard before. "We've been waiting for you." The baby opened her eyes, dark blue, unfocused, searching, and seemed to study her father's face. Ruth bustled around the room, cleaning up, giving them privacy while still keeping a professional eye on both mother and baby. After a while, she approached the bed. "She needs to eat," Ruth said gently. "Do you know how to help her latch?" Mara didn't, but Ruth was patient and knowledgeable, guiding her through those first awkward attempts at nursing. Eventually, the baby found what she was looking for and began to feed, and Mara marveled at the strangeness and rightness of it all. This tiny person had been inside her for months. Now she was here, separate but still dependent, still needing everything from Mara. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Ruth stayed for another hour, making sure both mother and baby were stable, giving Mara instructions about nursing and care and what to watch for in the coming days. "You did well," she said before leaving. "Both of you. She's strong and healthy. You should be proud." After Ruth left, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, and they took turns holding their daughter, neither of them able to look away from her for long. "We should give her a name," Mara said eventually. Caleb had been quiet for a while, just watching the baby sleep in his arms. Now he looked up, and Mara saw tears tracking down his face. "I've been thinking about that," he said, "and I have an idea, if you're amenable." "Tell me." "Hope," Caleb said simply. "I want to name her Hope." Mara felt her own eyes fill. It was perfect. A name that acknowledged everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, and looked forward to everything they still had ahead of them. "Hope Rourke," she said, testing how it sounded. "Yes, that's exactly right." Caleb carefully transferred the baby back to Mara's arms, then climbed onto the bed beside them, wrapping his arm around both of them. "Hope," he repeated, and this time it was a prayer and a promise and a celebration all at once. They stayed like that for a long time, a family, whole and new and perfect in their imperfection. Outside, the stars wheeled across the vast sky, indifferent and eternal. But inside the small bedroom at Iron Ridge Ranch, something precious and irreplaceable had been born. Not just a baby, though that was miracle enough, but hope itself, made flesh and given form. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Mara had read about babies, had helped care for younger siblings years ago, but nothing quite prepared her for the reality of caring for a newborn. Hope was healthy and strong, but she had opinions about when she wanted to eat and sleep, and those opinions didn't always align with what her exhausted parents needed. Mara spent hours nursing, changing diapers, walking the floor with a fussy infant who seemed determined to test the limits of her parents' endurance. But even in the most exhausted moments, when Mara was so tired she could barely think straight, she'd look down at her daughter's face and feel a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. Caleb was a devoted father from the first moment. He'd wake in the middle of the night to help with diaper changes, would walk Hope around the room when she was fussy, would sit beside Mara during marathon nursing sessions just to keep her company. He was patient in a way Mara hadn't expected, gentle and attentive. "You're really good at this," she told him one night after he'd managed to soothe Hope when Mara had been at her wit's end. Caleb looked surprised. "I've done this before, remember?" "I know, but I also know how hard it must be. The memories are bittersweet," Caleb acknowledged. "Sometimes I'll be holding Hope, and I'll remember holding Lily, and it hurts. But it's a different kind of hurt now, not the sharp, cutting pain it used to be. More like an ache, a reminder of love that existed and still matters, even though she's gone." He looked down at Hope sleeping peacefully in his arms. "And then I look at this little miracle, and I feel grateful," he continued. "Grateful I got a second chance at this. Grateful you gave me this gift. Grateful I get to be a father again." Mara leaned against him, exhausted but content. "We're going to be okay, aren't we? The three of us?" "Yeah," Caleb said with certainty. "We're going to be more than okay." The community rallied around them in those early weeks. Esther showed up regularly with food and advice, holding Hope so Mara could sleep or bathe. Margaret brought more baby clothes, each piece lovingly sewn. Hayes and the other ranchers pitched in extra help around the property so Caleb could spend more time with his new family. Even Judge Holloway stopped by, bringing a silver rattle that had been in his family for generations. "For good luck," he said, pressing it into Mara's hands, and to remind her that she comes from strong stock on both sides. As Hope grew, gaining weight, Becoming more alert, developing a personality that was uniquely hers, the ranch continued to thrive. Tom and William proved themselves capable and trustworthy, handling more and more responsibilities. The Water Management Council completed its bylaws and officially incorporated, creating a framework that would serve the region for generations. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from before, but just as meaningful. Early mornings with hope, days spent working the land, evenings as a family, the three of them together in the house that was no longer a tomb, but a home. Pochab. 5 years passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Hope grew from a tiny infant into a spirited little girl with dark hair like her mother's and her father's determined chin. She was fearless and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to help with whatever her parents were doing. "Mama, let me help," became her constant refrain, whether Mara was cooking dinner or tending the chickens or working in the garden. The ranch had expanded significantly in those years. With the stability created by the new water management system and the complete dismantling of Hale's corrupt network, the entire region had prospered. Caleb had purchased adjoining land from a retiring neighbor, nearly doubling Iron Ridge's size. They'd added another barn, expanded the house to include 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room, and invested in breeding stock that was becoming known throughout the territory for quality. But more than the physical growth, the ranch had become something else, a symbol of resilience and redemption. People still told the story of Caleb Rourke and Mara Quinn, though the details had become somewhat embellished over time. How they'd stood up to a tyrant, how they'd fought for their land and their love, how they'd proved that even broken people could build something beautiful. Young couples just starting out would sometimes ride by, and Caleb and Mara would invite them in for coffee, share their story, offer encouragement. Because if they could survive what they'd survived and still find happiness, then maybe anyone could. On a warm autumn afternoon, Mara stood on the porch, watching Hope chase the chickens around the yard, shrieking with laughter as the birds squawked and fluttered out of reach. She was supposed to be gathering eggs, but she'd gotten distracted, as she often did at 5 years old, by the pure joy of running. Mara smiled, one hand resting unconsciously on her belly, where a second child was growing. She was 4 months along this time, and while part of her wondered how they'd manage 2 children, mostly she just felt grateful. Grateful for this life. Grateful for this family. Grateful for the impossible series of events that had led her here. Caleb emerged from the barn, spotted Mara on the porch, and smiled. That easy, unguarded smile that still made her heart skip a beat even after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, climbing the steps to join her. "Everything," Mara said, leaning into him when he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "How different things are now. How far we've come. How lucky we are." "Lucky," Caleb repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you'd call it?" "What would you call it?" He considered for a moment. "Blessed, maybe. Though that makes it sound like it just happened to us, and we both know that's not true. We fought for this, both of us, every step of the way." "We did," Mara agreed. "But I still think there was some luck involved, or fate, or something, because what were the odds that I'd end up exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there?" "Same odds as me being ready to let someone in exactly when you showed up," Caleb pointed out. "Which is to say, pretty slim." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Hope play. She'd given up on the chickens and was now attempting to climb the fence to the corral, her small face screwed up in concentration. "Hope, not so high," Mara called out. "I've got it, Mama," Hope insisted, which was usually a sign that she absolutely did not have it. Caleb chuckled and headed down the steps to help their daughter before she could hurt herself. Mara watched them together, Caleb patiently showing Hope the safe way to climb, Hope listening with the serious expression she got when learning something important, and felt her chest tighten with love. This right here was everything she'd never known she wanted, everything she'd given up hoping for. Later that evening, after Hope had been put to bed and the house had settled into quiet, Caleb and Mara sat together on the porch steps just as they had so many times before. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time after the day's work was done, when they could just be together without demands or distractions. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Caleb said, his voice thoughtful. "What's that?" "The first night you came here. how dark and cold this place was, how dead I felt inside, how I was just going through the motions, not really living. He paused, taking her hand and threading his fingers through hers, and I was thinking about how one person, one brave, stubborn, impossible person, changed absolutely everything. It wasn't just me, Mara protested. We changed each other. Maybe, Caleb allowed, but you changed me first. You made me believe change was even possible. You refused to let me stay buried in my grief. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, hay and leather, and the soap he used. Then I guess we're even, because you gave me a home when I'd given up on ever finding one. You saw past all my mistakes and gave me a second chance. Third chance, technically, Caleb said. Fourth, if you count. Mara elbowed him gently. Don't be pedantic. He laughed and pulled her closer. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the familiar night sounds of the ranch, the soft lowing of cattle settling for the evening, the rustle of wind through the grass, the distant call of an owl hunting. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't taken that job? Caleb asked. If you'd kept running instead of stopping here? Mara had thought about it, actually, more than once. Sometimes, she admitted, I think about how close I came to not stopping. The stagecoach driver tried to talk me out of coming here, remember? And for a minute I almost listened, almost decided to keep moving. What changed your mind? I was tired, Mara said simply. Tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. And something about this place? She gestured at the land stretching out around them, dark now but still present, still solid. Something told me this was where I needed to be. Even though it was terrifying, even though every logical part of my brain said it was a mistake. I'm glad you didn't listen to the logical part, Caleb said. Me too. Above them, the stars wheeled across the vast frontier sky, the same stars that had looked down on this land for millennia, witnessing countless stories of struggle and survival, loss and redemption. The same stars that had shone on Mara's first terrifying night at the ranch, when she'd stood in the dark house and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. But tonight, looking up at those ancient lights, Mara felt only peace. Do you think she's happy? Mara asked softly, voicing a question she'd asked before but still needed to ask again. Anna, wherever she is, do you think she's happy with how things turned out? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Mara knew he was really considering the question, not just giving her an easy answer. Yeah, he said finally. I think she is. I think she'd be glad I found a way to live again, to love again, to be happy again. He squeezed Mara's hand gently. Anna was the kindest person I ever knew. She wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life mourning. She'd want me to find joy again, to build a new life. I hope so, Mara said. I know so, Caleb corrected gently. And I think she'd like you. I think she'd appreciate how you take care of me, how you've given Hope a mother's love, how you've made this place a home again. They sat together for a while longer until the night grew cold enough that they could see their breath in the air. Then they went inside together, checked on Hope one last time. She was sprawled across her small bed, one arm thrown over her head, sleeping with the absolute abandon only children could achieve, and went to their own room. As Mara lay in bed that night, Caleb's arm around her, their second child growing safely inside her, she thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her here. All the wrong turns and desperate choices, all the fear and pain and loneliness. And she thought about how every single moment of that journey, no matter how terrible, had been necessary to bring her to this place, this person, this life. She wouldn't change any of it, not if changing it meant she might not end up exactly here. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Caleb replied, his voice drowsy but certain. Always will. Mara smiled and let herself drift toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, and they would face all of it together, just as they always had, just as they always would. In the dust-choked town of Red Hollow, a story that began with a job posting no one dared take had unfolded across seasons and years. It had moved through fire and fear, through secrets revealed and battles fought, through loss and redemption and the slow, patient work of healing. And it ended here, in this moment of perfect peace. Two people who'd been broken by life, who'd lost everything that mattered, who'd been given every reason to give up, lying together in the dark, holding each other, holding on to hope. They'd proved that even in the harshest places, where loss cut deepest and enemies struck hardest, courage and truth could rewrite everything. They'd proved that second chances were real, that redemption was possible, that love could bloom even in the most barren soil. They'd proved that the story everyone else said had ended could begin again, different but no less beautiful. The ranch stood strong around them, built on land hard-won and well-loved. Inside, a family slept safe and sound. Outside, the frontier stretched endless under an infinity of stars. And somewhere in the darkness, if you listened very carefully, you might hear it, the sound of two hearts beating in perfect synchrony, keeping time to a rhythm that said home, that said family, that said forever. Caleb and Mara Rourke had found each other in the ruins and built something that would outlast them both. Not just a ranch, though that was no small thing, not just a family, though that was everything, but hope itself, made real and given form, proof that no matter how dark the night, no matter how long the winter, spring always comes eventually. For those brave enough to wait, for those strong enough to fight, for those foolish enough to believe in second chances and stubborn enough to seize them when they appear. The end of one story, the beginning of another, and in between, a lifetime of love.